My name is Harper, and I'm 32 years old. Right now, I'm sitting alone in my apartment while my phone buzzes non-stop with angry messages from my family. They're calling me bitter, jealous, and petty for refusing to attend my sister's wedding. What they don't know is that I have a video on my phone that's about to change everything. They think I skipped the wedding because I couldn't stand to see Celeste happy. The truth is so much worse than they could ever imagine. And I'm done protecting people who never protected me. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, or dealt with someone who seemed perfect on the outside but was rotten underneath, you're going to want to hear this. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe because this story has more twists than you can imagine. Trust me, you won't believe what I discovered about my sister's perfect fairy tale romance. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Growing up with Celeste was like living in someone else's shadow every single day of my life. She's 28 now, 4 years younger than me, but you'd think she was royalty the way my parents treated her. Our mother Diane and father Roland made it crystal clear from the time we were kids that Celeste was the golden child, and I was just there to make her look better. When I got a full scholarship to college, my mother's response was to ask if they gave those to anyone who applied. When Celeste barely graduated with a 2.5 GPA, they threw her a massive party and bought her a car. That was just how things worked in our family. Every achievement I earned was minimized or ignored completely. I worked my way up to a senior marketing position at a respected firm, putting in 60-hour weeks and sacrificing my social life. My parents never asked about my job except to complain that I worked too much. Meanwhile, Celeste bounced from one entry-level position to another, never staying anywhere longer than 8 months, and our parents constantly made excuses for her. She was finding herself, exploring her options, too talented to be tied down to one place. The double standard was so blatant that even extended family members noticed, but no one ever said anything. You don't question the family dynamic when you're part of it. Everything shifted into an even worse gear 6 months ago when Celeste brought Preston home for a family dinner. Preston was 34, tall, confident, and according to my mother, absolutely perfect. He was a successful real estate developer who drove a luxury car and wore expensive watches. From the moment he walked through the door, my parents practically worshipped him. My father, Roland, who barely ever complimented anyone, spent the entire evening talking about what a fine young man Preston was. My mother, Diane, couldn't stop gushing about how handsome he looked and how lucky Celeste was to find someone so accomplished. I'll admit, Preston was charming on the surface. He said all the right things, complimented my mother's cooking, talked business with my father, and doted on Celeste in a way that seemed almost scripted. But something felt off to me from that very first dinner. Maybe it was the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, or how he seemed to be performing rather than genuinely connecting. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my gut told me something wasn't right. Of course, when I mentioned this to my mother later, she accused me of being jealous that Celeste had found someone and I was still single. That became her favorite line whenever I expressed any concern about anything related to Celeste. The comparisons started immediately and never stopped. Every time I saw my mother, she'd find a way to bring up Preston and hint that I should be looking for someone like him. Why couldn't I find a successful man? Didn't I want to settle down? Was I going to focus on my career forever and end up alone? The questions were relentless and cruel, but that was standard procedure in my family. Celeste could do no wrong, and I could do nothing right. When Celeste announced her engagement just 3 months after meeting Preston, my parents acted like she'd won the lottery. My mother cried tears of joy. My father immediately offered to pay for whatever kind of wedding Celeste wanted. The whole family erupted in celebration. What shocked everyone was the timeline. Celeste wanted to get married in 8 weeks. She claimed it was because they were so in love they couldn't wait. And Preston could get time off work easier if they did it quickly. My parents thought it was romantic and spontaneous. I thought it was suspicious, but again, no one wanted to hear my concerns. The wedding planning began immediately, and it consumed everything. Celeste asked me to be her maid of honor, which I foolishly accepted because I still held on to some hope that maybe this could bring us closer together. I wanted to believe that despite everything, we could have a real sisterly relationship. That hope died pretty quickly once the demands started rolling in. Celeste had opinions about everything, and all of them required my time, money, or both. There were dress fittings at boutiques an hour away that I had to attend during my workday. There were cake tastings, flower consultations, and venue visits that always seemed to be scheduled at the most inconvenient times possible. Every time I tried to explain that I had work commitments, Celeste would get upset and accuse me of not caring about her special day. My mother would call and guilt-trip me about being unsupportive. It felt like I was being punished for having a career and responsibilities. My work started suffering because of all the wedding obligations. I missed deadlines for the first time in my career. I had to skip important client meetings because Celeste scheduled something wedding-related at the last minute and refused to reschedule. My boss started making comments about my lack of focus, and I could feel my professional reputation taking hits. When I tried to talk to Celeste about maybe spacing things out a little better or being more considerate of my schedule, she dismissed my concerns entirely. According to her, being maid of honor meant dropping everything else in my life to make her wedding perfect. And my parents completely backed her up on that expectation. The financial nightmare began with the bridesmaid dresses. Celeste took all of us bridesmaids to this exclusive boutique where Shed already picked out the dresses she wanted. When the consultant told us the price, I actually gasped out loud. $1,200 for a dress I'd wear once. The other bridesmaids were Celeste's friends from college, and they all came from wealthy families, so they didn't even blink at the price. But for me, that was a huge chunk of my savings. I pulled Celeste aside quietly and asked if maybe we could look at some other options that were a bit more affordable. You would have thought I asked her to get married in a garbage bag. Celeste's face turned red, and her eyes filled with tears immediately. She raised her voice loud enough for everyone in the boutique to hear and accused me of trying to ruin her wedding. She said I was being selfish and cheap, that I clearly didn't care about her happiness if I couldn't even buy a simple dress. The other bridesmaids stared at me like I'd committed some horrible crime. The boutique staff looked uncomfortable. I felt humiliated and trapped. So I agreed to buy the dress, even though it meant my savings account was going to take a serious hit. When I got home that night, I had messages from my mother waiting for me. Celeste had called her crying about how I'd embarrassed her in front of everyone by complaining about money. My mother lectured me for 20 minutes about how weddings are expensive, and I needed to be more supportive. She reminded me that Celeste had been dreaming of her perfect wedding since she was a little girl, and I was being selfish by making it about money. There was no point trying to explain my side. In my family, Celeste's feelings were the only ones that mattered. So I charged the dress to my credit card and tried to move on. Then came the bridal shower, which apparently I was expected to host and fund entirely by myself. Celeste sent me a detailed plan of what she wanted, and when I calculated the costs, I nearly had a panic attack. She wanted the shower at an upscale venue, with catering, decorations, party favors, and games. The budget was at least $3,000, and she wanted to invite 75 people. I was already stretching my finances thin with the dress and all the other wedding expenses, but when I tried to discuss a more modest shower, Celeste acted like I was asking her to have her party at a fast food restaurant. My mother got involved again, telling me that hosting the bridal shower was one of the most important duties of a maid of honor. And if I wasn't willing to do it properly, maybe I shouldn't have agreed to the role in the first place. I felt completely backed into a corner. So, I took on extra freelance work, worked evenings and weekends, and somehow scraped together the money for this elaborate shower. I spent weeks planning every detail, making sure everything was exactly as Celeste wanted it. I barely slept the week before the event because I was so stressed about making it perfect. The day of the shower, I was exhausted but proud of what I'd put together. The venue looked beautiful, the food was delicious, and all the guests seemed to be having a wonderful time. But Celeste's face when she walked in told me everything I needed to know. She looked around with this expression of disappointment, and within 10 minutes of arriving, she pulled me aside to tell me this wasn't what Shed imagined at all. She criticized the decorations, said the food wasn't fancy enough, complained that the party favors looked cheap, and made it clear that I'd let her down. In front of all her guests, she made little comments about how things weren't quite right, and I could see people looking at me with pity or judgment. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everyone how much money I'd spent, how many hours I'd worked to afford this, how I'd followed her instructions exactly. But I smiled and pretended everything was fine because that's what you do in my family. You swallow your feelings and protect Celeste's image. After the shower, several guests came up to me and made passive-aggressive comments about how they'd expected something more elaborate for Celeste. The other bridesmaids, who'd contributed nothing to the planning or expenses, agreed with Celeste that the shower had been disappointing. I drove home that day and cried for an hour. The absolute worst came with the bachelorette weekend. Celeste announced she wanted a 3-day trip to Vegas, staying at a luxury hotel, with all expenses paid by yours truly as her maid of honor. My portion alone was going to be $2,500, and that was just for my own hotel room, flights, and share of the activities. I was already maxed out financially from everything else, but Celeste insisted this was non-negotiable. She'd already told all her friends about the Vegas trip, and if I backed out now, it'd be ruining her bachelorette party and embarrassing her. I picked up extra shifts at work, took on more freelance projects, and basically worked myself into exhaustion to afford this trip. I was running on 4 hours of sleep a night, drinking way too much coffee, and my health was suffering. My boss had already warned me that my performance was slipping, and I was terrified I might lose my job, but I felt like I had no choice. My family had made it clear that not supporting Celeste's wedding was the ultimate betrayal, so I had to make it work somehow. The Vegas weekend was 3 days of pure torture. I was so exhausted from overworking that I could barely function, but Celeste and her friends wanted to party non-stop. They made plans for expensive restaurants, exclusive clubs, and spa treatments that kept adding to the bill. Every time I tried to sit out an activity to save money or just rest, Celeste would pout and make comments about how I wasn't being fun. The other bridesmaids started gossiping about how I was cheap and boring, and I could hear them whispering about me when they thought I wasn't listening. Celeste made the whole weekend about pointing out everything I did wrong. My outfit wasn't fashionable enough. I wasn't drinking enough to be fun. I went to bed too early instead of staying out partying until dawn. She made jokes at my expense constantly, and her friends laughed along. I felt like I was back in high school being bullied, except this time it was my own sister leading the charge. By the time we flew home, I was physically, emotionally, and financially drained. My credit card was maxed out, my savings were gone, and I felt like I had nothing left to give. When I got back to work, my boss called me into her office for a serious conversation about my performance. I'd missed important deadlines, my work quality had declined, and clients were starting to notice. She told me I needed to get my priorities straight or my job was at risk. I broke down and explained about the wedding obligations, and she was sympathetic but firm. My job couldn't continue to suffer, regardless of family commitments. I left that meeting feeling like my entire life was falling apart. I called Celeste that night and tried to explain everything. I told her I was struggling financially and professionally because of all the wedding demands. I asked if maybe we could scale back on some things, or if she could be a little more understanding about my situation. Her response was cold and dismissive. She told me to stop being so dramatic, that everyone makes sacrifices for weddings, and I was just jealous that she was getting married and I wasn't. Then she said something that still haunts me. She said, "I'd always been jealous of her success and happiness, and my so-called struggles were just excuses to make her wedding about me." The rehearsal dinner happened 2 weeks before the wedding, and I was dreading it after everything that had already gone wrong. I'd been working late on a crucial project that my boss had made clear could determine whether I kept my job, so I came straight from the office in my professional clothes. It was a nice outfit, a tailored blazer and slacks, perfectly appropriate for a dinner, but the moment I walked into the restaurant, Celeste took one look at me and her face twisted with anger. She stormed over to me in front of all the guests who'd already arrived and demanded to know why I wasn't dressed appropriately for her rehearsal dinner. I was confused because I thought I looked fine, but she insisted I looked like I'd just come from a business meeting and that I was embarrassing her. She actually told me to leave and go home to change into something more suitable. I tried to explain that I didn't have time to go home and come back, that I'd come straight from work because she'd scheduled this dinner during the week. But she didn't want to hear it. The entire room went silent as Celeste made an announcement to everyone there. She said, and I'll never forget her exact words, that her sister cared more about her job than her wedding, and that some people just couldn't prioritize what really mattered. Every single person at that rehearsal dinner turned to stare at me with judgment in their eyes. My mother looked mortified, not because Celeste had humiliated me, but because I'd apparently embarrassed the family by showing up in work clothes. My father shook his head in disappointment. Preston stood next to Celeste with this little smirk on his face, like he was enjoying watching me get torn down. I felt my face burning with shame and anger, but I couldn't defend myself without making things worse. So I just stood there and took it while Celeste continued to make comments throughout the evening about how some people just don't understand how to be supportive. The other guests were kind enough not to pile on directly, but I could hear whispered conversations and feel their eyes on me all night. I sat at the end of the table, barely touched my food, and counted the minutes until I could leave without causing another scene. What happened after the rehearsal dinner was even more disturbing. I was standing outside waiting for my car from the valet when Preston appeared next to me. Head had quite a bit to drink, and he stood closer to me than was comfortable. He started asking me these inappropriate questions about my dating life, whether I was seeing anyone, why I was always so tense. His tone was overly familiar and made my skin crawl. When I tried to step away and create some distance, he put his hand on my arm and told me I needed to relax more, that I took everything too seriously. I pulled away and made some excuse about needing to check on my car, but Preston's behavior had set off alarm bells in my head. This was my sister's fiancé, about to become my brother-in-law, and he was acting completely inappropriate. I tried to brush it off as him just being drunk and not thinking clearly. But later that night, I got a text message from Preston's number. It said he'd noticed I looked tense at dinner and that he could help me relax if I ever wanted to talk. The message made me feel sick to my stomach. I didn't respond and tried to convince myself I was reading too much into it. The next major disaster came with the maid of honor speech. I'd spent hours writing something heartfelt and meaningful about growing up with Celeste, about watching her find love with Preston, about hoping for her happiness. I tried to strike a balance between being genuine and meeting the expectations everyone had for this speech. When I showed it to Celeste beforehand, which Shed insisted I do, she read through it with increasing disapproval on her face. She told me the speech made everything about me and my feelings instead of being about her. She said it included too many stories from our childhood that made her sound less than perfect. She didn't like that I'd mentioned any struggles or imperfect moments because she wanted her wedding to be magical and flawless. Then she actually rewrote my entire speech, turning it into this generic, shallow piece that made me sound bitter and jealous. Every line she wrote had this undertone of me being the lesser sister, the one who'd never quite measured up, the one who was just so grateful to witness Celeste's perfect love story. I read through her rewritten version and felt my stomach drop. If I delivered this speech, I would sound pathetic and envious. It would cement everyone's view of me as the jealous older sister who couldn't handle Celeste's happiness. I told her I wasn't comfortable reading her version, that I wanted to deliver something more authentic and genuine. Celeste's response was explosive. She started screaming at me about how I'd always been jealous of her, how I couldn't stand to see her happy, how I was trying to sabotage her wedding at every turn. My parents were called in for another intervention. This was becoming a pattern where any disagreement with Celeste resulted in a full family meeting where I was attacked from all sides. This time, Celeste, Preston, my mother, and my father all sat down together to confront me about my jealous behavior. They had an actual list of complaints they'd compiled about me. I wasn't enthusiastic enough about the wedding. I'd complained about money too many times. I focused too much on my job instead of being present for Celeste. It embarrassed everyone with my work clothes at the rehearsal dinner. The list went on and on. I tried to defend myself and explain my side of things, but every point I made was immediately dismissed. My mother told me I was making excuses. My father said I needed to take responsibility for my attitude. Celeste cried and said I was breaking her heart with my selfishness. And Preston sat there the entire time with this satisfied smirk on his face, like he was enjoying watching my family tear me apart. At one point, he even chimed in to say that he'd noticed my negative energy from the beginning and that maybe I needed to work on myself before being part of other people's celebrations. The meeting ended with my mother delivering an ultimatum. She told me I needed to fix my attitude immediately, apologize to Celeste for all the problems it caused, deliver the speech exactly as Celeste had written it, and stop making the wedding about myself. If I couldn't do those things, she said, then maybe I shouldn't come to the wedding at all. The threat hung in the air, and I knew she meant it. My family was fully prepared to uninvite me from my own sister's wedding if I didn't fall in line completely. Everything changed 1 week before the wedding when I went over to Celeste's apartment to help with some last-minute wedding tasks. Shed called me that morning demanding I come over immediately because she needed help organizing wedding favors, even though I'd already told her I had a work commitment that day. As usual, my needs didn't matter, so I rearranged my schedule and showed up at her apartment. Celeste was in a terrible mood, snapping at me about everything, before finally saying she had to run out for an emergency hair appointment and would be back in an hour. I sat on her couch, surrounded by boxes of wedding favors that apparently needed immediate attention, feeling exhausted and resentful. That's when I noticed her laptop sitting open on the coffee table. The screen was still on, and I could see Shed left her messages open. I wasn't trying to snoop, I genuinely wasn't, but then a notification popped up right on the screen. It was from a dating app. My first thought was that maybe someone had hacked her account or was messaging her inappropriately, and I should let her know so she could handle it. But then another notification popped up. And another. They were all messages to Celeste, all from different men, all dated within the past 3 months while she'd been engaged to Preston. My heart started racing. My first instinct was to look away, to close the laptop and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But more notifications kept coming, and I couldn't ignore what was right in front of me. I told myself I was looking to protect Preston, to see if my sister was being unfaithful so I could tell him before he made a huge mistake. I clicked on one of the message threads, and what I found made my blood run cold. These weren't messages from random men hitting on my sister. These were active conversations Celeste was having with multiple guys. But it was worse than just cheating. Way worse. I found messages between Celeste and someone named Kyle where she was bragging about her plan. She'd written that Preston was loaded and she was going to divorce him in 2 years and take half his money. She told Kyle to just wait for her, that they'd be set for life once she executed her plan. I sat there staring at the screen, unable to process what I was reading. There were dozens of messages spelling out Celeste's entire scheme. She'd targeted Preston specifically because he was wealthy and successful. She'd researched him before they even met, found out about his real estate business and his assets. She'd engineered their entire relationship as a con to get access to his money. The messages to Kyle were full of intimate details, proving they were having an affair, but they were also full of Celeste's calculations about exactly how to play this out. She'd already gotten Preston to sign a prenup, but She'd discovered there was a loophole. If they stayed married for 2 years, the prenup became invalid under certain conditions, and She'd be entitled to half of everything had accumulated during the marriage. Her plan was to stay married for exactly 2 years and 1 month, then file for divorce and walk away with millions. In the meantime, she was going to maintain the perfect wife image while continuing her affair with Kyle and living her real life in secret. The most disturbing part was how she talked about Preston in these messages. She called him desperate and stupid. She mocked his appearance, his personality, the way he talked. She described their relationship as performing a role in a play, and she congratulated herself on being such a good actress that everyone believed she was actually in love. She wrote about how pathetic Preston was for falling for her act so completely. She told Kyle that Preston was so blinded by her beauty and charm that he'd never suspect what was coming. There were other affairs documented in her messages beyond just Kyle. Celeste had been sleeping with multiple men throughout her relationship with Preston, including during the engagement. She'd been carrying on these affairs while planning this elaborate wedding, while accepting expensive gifts from Preston, while letting him believe they were building a life together. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Screenshots, explicit messages, plans laid out in detail. Everything I needed to prove that my sister was a calculating con artist. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of everything on the screen. I photographed the messages with Kyle, the conversations about the financial scheme, the proof of multiple affairs, the mocking comments about Preston. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady, but I made sure I got clear images of every piece of evidence. Then I did something I'm still not sure was the right choice, but in the moment it felt necessary. I opened my phone's video recording feature and recorded the entire screen, scrolling through message after message so everything was captured. The video was 5 minutes long and absolutely damning. You could see Celeste's dating profiles still active, her messages to Kyle and the other men she was involved with, her detailed plans to take Preston's money, everything. There was no way to misinterpret or explain away what was in that video. It was clear, undeniable proof that my sister was not the person everyone thought she was. She wasn't the perfect bride marrying for love. She was a predator who'd chosen her victim carefully and was about to destroy his life. I closed the laptop and sat there in shock, trying to figure out what to do with this information. My mind was racing with questions and scenarios. Should I tell Preston directly? Should I show this to my parents first? Would anyone even believe me, given how they already saw me as the jealous sister? I knew Celeste would deny everything if confronted. She'd call the screenshots fake, claim I'd manipulated the images, accuse me of being so jealous that I'd resort to making up lies to ruin her happiness. But Preston deserved to know. He was about to marry someone who was planning to use him and discard him. He was going to invest his heart, his future, and his financial security into a relationship that was nothing but a calculated scam. I couldn't let that happen without at least trying to warn him. I decided I would approach him privately before the wedding, show him the evidence, and let him make his own decision about what to do. I would try to handle this as quietly and carefully as possible to minimize the damage. For the next 3 days, I barely slept. I kept looking at the evidence on my phone, making sure it was all still there, that I hadn't dreamed the whole thing. Part of me hoped I'd somehow misunderstood, that there was an explanation for what I'd seen. But every time I reviewed the screenshots and the video, the truth was undeniable. Celeste was conning Preston, and I was the only one who knew. The weight of that knowledge was crushing. I felt sick every time I thought about having to tell him, about the pain it would cause, about the explosion it would create in my family. Before I could figure out how to approach Preston with the evidence, everything fell apart in the worst possible way. Someone, and I still don't know who, sent Celeste an anonymous message warning her that Harper might try something to ruin the wedding. The message apparently suggested I was planning some kind of sabotage, and Celeste immediately knew I must have seen something on her laptop. She didn't waste any time calling another emergency family meeting, but this one was different. This time, she was on the offensive, accusing me of planning to destroy her wedding before I'd even had a chance to say anything. When I arrived at my parents' house, the whole family was already there waiting for me like some kind of intervention ambush. Celeste had worked herself up into a state of hysterical tears. My mother looked at me with such disappointment and anger. My father sat there with his arms crossed, already convinced I'd done something terrible. And Preston stood next to Celeste with his hand on her shoulder, playing the supportive fiancé while shooting me looks of contempt. The whole scene was staged to paint me as the villain before I could defend myself. Celeste started the attack by saying she'd received information that I was planning to do something to ruin her wedding day. She said people had told her I'd been making comments about Preston not being good enough, about the wedding being too extravagant, about Celeste not deserving happiness. None of this was true. But she delivered it with such conviction that everyone in the room believed her immediately. My mother demanded to know if these accusations were true, and before I could even answer, she started listing other grievances about my behavior throughout the wedding planning process. I tried to stay calm and deny the accusations, but Celeste kept pushing. She asked pointed questions about whether I'd been in her apartment, whether I'd used her computer, whether I'd seen anything I wanted to share with the family. It was clear she knew I'd discovered something, and she was trying to get ahead of it by making me look like the aggressor. The way she was maneuvering the conversation was actually impressive in a terrifying way. She was setting the trap perfectly, and I was walking right into it. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I admitted that yes, I had been in her apartment, and yes, I had seen some messages on her laptop. The room exploded immediately. My mother started screaming at me for snooping through Celeste's private things. My father called me invasive and disrespectful. Celeste clutched Preston's arm and cried harder, saying she couldn't believe her own sister would violate her privacy like that. Preston called me disturbed and accused me of being obsessed with Celeste's relationship. I tried to explain that I hadn't been snooping, that the laptop was open and notifications kept popping up, but no one wanted to hear my side. I tried to tell them that what I'd seen was serious, that Celeste wasn't who they thought she was, that Preston needed to know the truth before the wedding. But the more I tried to explain, the more they attacked me. My mother told me I'd gone too far this time. My father said I was letting my jealousy turn me into someone he didn't recognize. Celeste delivered an Oscar-worthy performance, sobbing about how those messages were just jokes with her friend, how I'd completely misunderstood private conversations, how I was so jealous of her happiness that I was willing to make up vicious lies. Preston played his part perfectly too. He said he'd noticed from the beginning that I had an unhealthy fixation on his relationship with Celeste. He claimed I'd made inappropriate comments to him, that I'd tried to undermine their relationship multiple times, that I'd even sent him that weird text message after the rehearsal dinner. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was twisting the truth completely, making it sound like I'd been the one behaving inappropriately when he'd been the one who made me uncomfortable. But everyone believed him because why wouldn't they? Perfect Preston wouldn't lie. The confrontation reached its climax when Celeste demanded I show them the evidence I claimed to have. She said if I really had proof of these terrible things I was accusing her of, then I should show everyone right now. My mother backed her up, saying if there was real evidence I needed to produce it immediately. They all stood there staring at me, waiting for me to pull out my phone and show them the screenshots and video. It was the perfect trap because Celeste knew exactly what would happen if I did. I refused to show them. I knew that if I handed over my phone, they'd delete everything. Celeste would grab it and destroy the evidence before anyone could really look at it. Or they'd all claim the screenshots were fake, that I'd manipulated them somehow, that the video was staged. There was no way to win in that moment. If I showed them the evidence, they'd destroy it or discredit it. If I didn't show them, they'd say I was making everything up. Either way, I was trapped. My mother delivered the final blow. She told me that I was no longer welcome at the wedding. She said my jealousy and my lies had finally crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Celeste agreed tearfully, saying she couldn't have someone at her wedding who was trying to destroy her marriage before it even began. My father nodded his approval. Preston said it was probably for the best that I stayed away since my negative energy would just bring everyone down. Just like that, I was uninvited from my own sister's wedding, banned from the family event because I'd tried to tell the truth. But it got worse. My mother didn't stop at just uninviting me from the wedding. She sent messages to our entire extended family explaining that I wouldn't be attending because of some personal issues I was dealing with. Of course, she made it sound like I was having some kind of breakdown, that I'd been exhibiting jealous and unstable behavior, that the family was very concerned about me. Within hours, my phone was flooded with messages from aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends. Some were concerned, asking if I was okay. Others were judgmental, calling me bitter and petty. A few were outright cruel, telling me I'd always been the problem child and now everyone could finally see it. The isolation was immediate and devastating. Family members I'd been close to for years suddenly blocked me on social media. Cousins I'd grown up with sent me nasty messages about being jealous of Celeste's success. My Aunt Lenora, who'd always been kind to me, sent a long text about how disappointed she was in my behavior. Friends of the family who'd known me since childhood were suddenly treating me like I was toxic. Celeste had successfully painted me as the villain, and everyone believed her version of events without question. I tried reaching out to a few family members to explain my side, but no one wanted to listen. They'd all been told I was making up lies about Celeste, and they'd chosen to believe that narrative. Some of them had seen Celeste's performance throughout the years and bought into the image she'd created. Others just didn't want to deal with family drama and found it easier to side with the majority. A few probably suspected something was off but didn't want to rock the boat. Either way, I was completely alone. The morning of the wedding was one of the darkest days of my life. I stayed in my apartment, unable to face going anywhere or seeing anyone. My phone had been buzzing non-stop since dawn with hateful messages from family members. They were all getting ready for the big celebration, and they wanted to make sure I knew exactly what I was missing and how much Eid disappointed everyone. The messages ranged from passive-aggressive to outright cruel, and each one felt like another knife in my back. My cousin Bridget, who had been close to growing up, sent me a message saying how beautiful everything looked, and how sad it was that some people couldn't put aside their jealousy to be happy for others. My Uncle Graham sent a long text about family values and how important it is to support each other's happiness, clearly directed at me. Various aunts and cousins sent similar messages, all with the same undertone. They were celebrating Celeste's perfect day, while simultaneously making sure I felt like garbage for not being there. The psychological warfare was expertly executed. Then the social media onslaught began. Celeste had set up a wedding hashtag, and people started posting photos from the ceremony and reception. Every image was calculated to show how perfect and magical everything was. My mother posted a photo of herself with Celeste in her wedding dress, with the caption about being surrounded by people who truly love me. The emphasis on truly was clearly meant as a dig at me. My father posted about his beautiful daughter marrying a wonderful man, with comments about how proud he was of her choices. The subtext was obvious to anyone paying attention. The worst was watching the progression of photos, showing this fairy tale wedding that Id helped fund and plan, but wasn't allowed to attend. All those dress fittings, all that money spent on the bridal shower and bachelorette party, all those hours of my life sacrificed to make this day perfect, and I wasn't even there to see it. But more than that, I was watching Preston marry someone who was planning to destroy him, and I hadn't been able to stop it. That guilt weighed on me more than anything else. As the reception got underway, family members started recording videos and sending them directly to me. I don't know if they coordinated this or if multiple people just independently decided to torture me, but suddenly my phone was filled with video messages clearly meant to make me feel terrible. My Uncle Graham raised his glass in a toast and made comments about cutting negative people out of your life and surrounding yourself only with those who support your happiness. The camera panned to show everyone raising their glasses in agreement, all of them knowing this was directed at me. One of the bridesmaids recorded herself and the other bridesmaids laughing and having fun, talking about how amazing it was to be part of such a perfect wedding celebration. She made a comment about how some people are just too bitter to appreciate beautiful moments, and the other bridesmaids agreed while giggling. They were clearly tipsy and enjoying themselves, completely buying into the narrative that I was the jealous, bitter sister who'd tried to ruin everything. They had no idea they were celebrating a complete lie. Then Preston gave a speech that was recorded and sent to me by at least 3 different people. In it, he talked about the importance of cutting toxic people from your life, about recognizing when someone's jealousy and negativity are poisoning your happiness, about having the strength to protect your peace by removing people who don't want the best for you. He never said my name, but everyone in that room knew exactly who he was talking about. The guests applauded enthusiastically, and Celeste gazed at him with adoring eyes, playing her role perfectly. Late in the evening, after the reception had been going for hours, I received a group text message. It came from my mother, my father, Celeste, and several other family members who were all listed as recipients. The message was long and detailed, laying out all of my supposed crimes over the years. They wrote about how I'd been jealous of Celeste since we were children, how I'd never been able to be happy for her success, how I'd tried to compete with her constantly, how I'd finally gone too far by making up vicious lies to try to ruin her perfect relationship. The message went on to list specific examples of my jealousy and bad behavior, most of which were either exaggerated or completely fabricated. They claimed I'd always been resentful of the attention Celeste received. They said I'd been hostile to Preston from the moment I met him, because I couldn't stand to see Celeste with someone successful. They accused me of trying to sabotage the wedding at every turn. From complaining about costs, to showing up inappropriately dressed, to the rehearsal dinner, to finally inventing an elaborate story about infidelity and financial schemes. The message ended with a clear statement that I was no longer considered part of the family. They wrote that after years of dealing with my toxic behavior, they'd finally had enough. They said that unless I got serious help for my jealousy issues and made genuine amends for the damage it caused, I was not welcome at family gatherings, holidays, or events. They were cutting me off completely, and they wanted me to know that this decision was unanimous. Every single person on that text thread agreed that I needed to be removed from the family. I sat there reading and rereading that message, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. My entire family had just formally disowned me on my sister's wedding night. They'd waited until they were all together, celebrating, feeling united and righteous, and then they'd collectively decided to exile me. The cruelty of the timing wasn't lost on me. They wanted me to know that while they were all together having the time of their lives, they were also all agreeing that I was dead to them. But something shifted in me as I sat there alone in my apartment, surrounded by all these hateful messages and videos, holding my phone with the evidence of the truth that no one wanted to see. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn my family's approval and love. I'd sacrificed my time, my money, my career, my mental health, all in the hope that maybe someday they'd value me the way they valued Celeste. But they never would. Because the problem wasn't me. The problem was a family system that needed a scapegoat. And I'd been cast in that role from birth. I looked at the evidence I'd saved on my phone. The screenshots of Celeste's messages to Kyle. The video I'd recorded of her laptop screen showing her entire scheme. The proof that everything I'd said was true. They'd called me a liar and exiled me from the family, but I had the truth right here in my hands. They didn't want to see it before because it would have disrupted their perfect narrative. But now the wedding was over. Preston was legally married to Celeste. The damage was done, and I was done protecting people who had never protected me. I opened my laptop and started drafting an email. I wasn't going to let them paint me as the crazy, jealous sister while Celeste destroyed Preston's life and got away with it. I wasn't going to let them exile me without consequences. They wanted to cut me off? Fine. But they were going to know the truth first. All of them. Every single person who'd attacked me. Who'd believed the lies. Who'd sent me hateful messages. Who'd participated in my public humiliation. They were all going to see exactly what kind of person Celeste really was. I spent 2 hours crafting the email, writing and rewriting it until I got the tone exactly right. I didn't want to sound defensive or emotional. I didn't want to give them any excuse to dismiss this as the ramblings of a bitter, jealous person. I needed to be calm, factual, and clear. The message needed to speak for itself, and the evidence needed to be undeniable. Every word had to count, because this was my one chance to tell my side of the story and make people listen. The email started with a simple statement. I wrote that I had not wanted to do this. That I'd tried to handle the situation privately to protect Preston and minimize the damage to the family, but that they had forced my hand. I explained that I'd discovered evidence of serious deception by accident when Celeste's laptop notifications appeared while I was at her apartment. I made it clear that I hadn't been snooping, that the information had essentially presented itself to me, and that I'd felt morally obligated to inform Preston before he made a life-altering decision based on lies. I detailed exactly what had happened when I tried to share my concerns with the family. How I'd been accused of jealousy before anyone would listen to what I'd found. How I'd been attacked, gaslit, and ultimately exiled from the family for trying to tell the truth. How I'd been painted as unstable and vindictive when all I'd wanted was to prevent someone from being hurt. I laid out the timeline of events clearly and factually, without embellishment or emotion, just the plain truth of what had occurred. Then I got to the heart of the matter. I wrote that I understood they didn't believe me, that Celeste had convinced them all I was making up lies out of jealousy. I acknowledged that without proof, it was my word against hers, and they'd chosen to believe her. But I wrote that I did have proof, undeniable evidence of everything I'd claimed, and that it was attached to this email. I stated clearly that this wasn't manipulation or fakery. This was video recorded directly from Celeste's own laptop, showing her own messages in her own words, with timestamps and context that couldn't be disputed. I included a final paragraph explaining why I was sending this now. I wrote that they'd spent the entire wedding day sending me hateful messages and videos, that they'd formally disowned me in a group text, and that they'd made it clear I was no longer part of the family. I said that since I had nothing left to lose, and since they'd made their choice about who to believe without ever looking at the evidence, they could now live with the full truth of what they'd chosen to support. I ended with a simple statement that I hoped Preston would find this information in time to protect himself, and that I was done protecting people who had never cared about protecting me. I attached the 5-minute video ID recorded to the email. The video quality was clear and steady. It showed Celeste's dating app profiles still active with recent messages. It showed her conversations with Kyle, where she explicitly laid out her plan to marry Preston for his money and divorce him after 2 years. It showed messages to multiple other men she was sleeping with during her engagement. It showed her mocking Preston, calling him stupid and desperate, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate him. Every damning piece of evidence was captured in that video, undeniable and devastating. I spent another 30 minutes compiling the email list. I included my mother and father, obviously. I added Celeste's email, though I knew she'd probably delete it without watching. I included Preston's email address, which I'd gotten from the wedding planning documents. I added every aunt, uncle, and cousin who'd sent me hateful messages. I included the bridesmaids who'd mocked me. I added extended family members and family friends who'd been at the wedding. I even included some of Preston's family members whose contact information I had, figuring they deserved to know what kind of person their new family member really was. My finger hovered over the send button for a long moment. I knew that once I sent this, there was no taking it back. This would explode my family in ways that couldn't be repaired. Relationships would be destroyed. The illusion of Celeste's perfection would shatter. Preston's life would be turned upside down. There would be consequences I couldn't even predict. But I also knew that these people had just spent an entire day torturing me, had exiled me from the family, had refused to even consider that I might be telling the truth. They'd made their choice. Now they could live with the reality of it. I hit send at exactly midnight on Celeste's wedding night. The email went out to over 40 people, all of whom had either attacked me or stood by while I was attacked. I attached the video and watched as the email left my outbox. There was no going back now. I set my phone down and waited for the inevitable explosion. It didn't take long. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing with incoming messages. The first response came from my cousin Bridget, who'd been one of the people sending me passive-aggressive messages throughout the day. Her text said, "Oh my God, Harper, is this real?" Then came a message from my Aunt Lenora saying she needed to call me immediately. My Uncle Graham sent a message asking if the video was actually from Celeste's computer. The responses started flooding in, and I could tell from the tone that people were watching the video and having their entire understanding of the situation shift. The messages came faster and faster. Some people were apologizing immediately, saying they'd been wrong and they should have listened to me. Others were in shock, asking questions and trying to understand what they'd just watched. A few were still skeptical, asking if the video could have been faked somehow, but the tone was different now. They weren't dismissive or cruel. They were genuinely questioning what they'd believed because the evidence was staring them in the face. Then, Preston called. It was 1 a.m, technically his wedding night. And his voice on the phone was shaking so badly, I could barely understand him at first. He said he'd just watched the video. He said Celeste was asleep next to him in their honeymoon suite, exhausted from the wedding day. He said he'd gotten up to check his email and found my message. He asked me in this broken voice if what he'd just watched was real. If those were really Celeste's messages, if she really said all those things about him. I confirmed gently that yes, it was all real. I explained exactly how Eid discovered it, that it had been an accident, that Eid tried to tell him before the wedding but had been shut down by the family. Preston started crying on the phone. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs. He kept saying he'd defended her. That he'd called me terrible names. That he'd stood by while my family attacked me. He said he'd believed I was jealous and unstable, and instead I'd been the only one trying to protect him. He said he'd checked Celeste's phone while she slept and found messages to Kyle from earlier that day, during the wedding itself. She'd been texting her affair partner while walking down the aisle to marry him. The next morning brought chaos I couldn't have imagined. The video had spread beyond just the people I'd sent it to. Family members were forwarding it to each other, sharing it in group chats, sending it to people who hadn't been at the wedding but needed to see what was happening. Screenshots from the video were being shared on social media by people who felt betrayed by Celeste's deception. The carefully crafted image of the perfect wedding and the perfect couple was disintegrating in real time. Celeste woke up to discover Preston had left the honeymoon suite. She called my mother in a panic, and I only know this because my mother called me screaming about what I'd done. Celeste had apparently tried to claim the video was fake, that I'd somehow manipulated it or staged it, but Preston had already verified everything with the phone company. Head checked the timestamps and metadata on the messages. Head looked at Celeste's actual phone and found the same conversations. The evidence was irrefutable, and Celeste's lies were falling apart faster than she could create new ones. Preston didn't just leave the honeymoon suite. He went straight to a lawyer's office first thing Monday morning and filed for an annulment. In our state, if a marriage hasn't been consummated and there's evidence of fraud, an annulment can be granted quickly. Preston had both. The marriage had never been consummated because Head left on their wedding night, and the video provided clear evidence of fraudulent intent. His lawyer assured him the annulment would be granted within days. Preston also discovered that Celeste had been stealing from him even before the wedding. When Preston's lawyer started digging into the financial situation, they found credit cards Celeste had opened in Preston's name without his knowledge. She'd charged over $20,000 on these cards for personal expenses that had nothing to do with the wedding. She'd also transferred money from Preston's accounts into hidden accounts he didn't know existed. The woman had been robbing him blind while planning to rob him even more thoroughly after the 2-year mark. Preston's lawyer assured him they'd be pursuing legal action for fraud and identity theft on top of the annulment. My mother's response to all of this was not what you'd expect from a parent discovering their child had done something horrific. She didn't call to apologize for not believing me. She didn't express shock or disappointment in Celeste. Instead, she called me crying and screaming about how I'd humiliated the family. She demanded to know how I could do this to them, how I could send that video to everyone and destroy the family's reputation. She was more concerned about what people in the community were saying than about the fact that her daughter had committed fraud and was a serial cheater. My father took 3 days to contact me at all. When he finally sent a text message, it wasn't an apology. It was a brief message saying we need to talk about what happens next. There was no acknowledgement that had been wrong about me. No recognition of how terribly I'd been treated. No apology for the things Head said, or the way Head allowed me to be exiled from the family. Just a practical message about managing the situation now that the truth was out. I didn't respond to his text. I had nothing to say to him. Celeste left dozens of voicemails on my phone over the next few days. I listened to them in order, and it was fascinating to hear her cycle through different manipulation tactics. The first few voicemails were angry and defensive. She screamed at me for ruining her life, insisted that the video was taken out of context, claimed that her messages to Kyle were just jokes that I'd twisted into something sinister. She called me every name in the book and threatened to sue me for defamation and invasion of privacy. When the angry approach didn't work, Celeste switched to desperate bargaining. Her voicemails became pleading and pathetic. She begged me to tell everyone the video was fake, offered to do anything I wanted if I'd just help her fix this situation. She claimed Shed made mistakes but that I was destroying her entire life over a few poor choices. She cried and said she didn't know what Shed do if I didn't help her. The manipulation was textbook, and I recognized every tactic from years of watching her work our parents. When I didn't respond to the bargaining, Celeste escalated to threats. Her final voicemails were dark and menacing. She said I'd pay for what I'd done to her. She said Shed make sure I regretted ever sending that video. She claimed she had dirt on me that Shed share with everyone if I didn't back down. The threats were empty because Celeste had no real dirt on me, but the viciousness in her voice was chilling. I saved every voicemail as evidence, just in case I needed protection later. Then Kyle entered the picture in an unexpected way. The affair partner who was supposed to wait for Celeste while she executed her scheme apparently didn't appreciate being exposed. He called me from a blocked number and initially tried to intimidate me, angry that I'd ruined their plan and exposed him as well. But when I didn't back down and told him I'd recorded this conversation too, he shifted tactics. Suddenly, Kyle wanted to talk about everything Celeste had done. Kyle revealed details I hadn't known before. He told me the affair had been going on for over 2 years, that Celeste had been sleeping with him while dating Preston from the very beginning. He explained that Celeste had multiple affairs beyond just him. that Shed essentially been running a rotation of different men while maintaining her relationship with Preston. He described how Celeste had laid out her entire financial scheme to him months before the engagement, how Shed specifically targeted Preston because Shed researched his business and knew he was wealthy. The wedding guests who'd attended and sent me cruel messages were now messaging me again with very different tones. Some sent genuine apologies, acknowledging they'd been completely wrong about me and had participated in my unfair treatment. Several people admitted they'd had bad feelings about Celeste or Preston's relationship, but had ignored their instincts because everyone else seemed so happy about the wedding. A few asked for details about how to get their gifts back since the marriage was being annulled. Others just distanced themselves from the entire family, not wanting to be associated with the drama. The local community gossip reached levels it'd never seen before. In our mid-sized town, everyone knew everyone, and a scandal this big became instant news. People who'd attended the wedding were talking to friends and neighbors. The story spread to people who'd never even met our family. The local Facebook groups were full of discussions about the scandal, though most people were kind enough not to name names directly. Still, everyone knew exactly who they were talking about. Celeste's reputation was destroyed, not just in our family, but throughout the entire community. My cousin Bridget reached out and asked to meet for lunch. When we sat down together, she broke down crying and apologized for everything. She explained that Celeste had been manipulating her for years, telling her lies about me, painting herself as the victim of my jealousy. Bridget admitted Shed participated in attacking me at the wedding and in the messages afterward, and she felt horrible about it. She said watching that video had made her realize how blind Shed been to Celeste's true nature. We talked for hours, and by the end, I felt like maybe it'd get at least one real family relationship back. My Uncle Graham sent me a long, handwritten letter. In it, he apologized profusely for his behavior and explained that He'd been completely taken in by Celeste's performance over the years. He acknowledged that He'd said horrible things to me at the wedding and in his messages afterward. He took full responsibility for his actions and didn't make excuses. He wrote that he understood if I couldn't forgive him, but he wanted me to know that he recognized how wrong He'd been and that he supported me completely now. The letter was genuine and moving, and I appreciated his accountability. My Aunt Lenora visited me in person, which I hadn't expected. She came to my apartment, and we talked for a long time about the family dynamics. She admitted that Shed always known there was favoritism toward Celeste, but hadn't wanted to interfere because it wasn't her place as an aunt. She said Shed suspected something was off about Celeste's relationship with Preston but had dismissed her instincts because everyone else was so excited. She apologized for sending me that disappointed text message and for not standing up for me when I needed support. She promised Shed do better going forward. 2 months after sending that video, my life looked completely different than it had before. I'd changed my phone number to escape the constant harassment from Celeste and a few family members who still somehow blamed me for exposing her. I'd blocked most of my immediate family on all social media platforms. I kept only minimal contact with my parents, speaking to them maybe once every 2 weeks in brief, surface-level conversations that never touched on anything real. The distance was necessary for my mental health and my healing process. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma and scapegoat dynamics. Through our sessions, I began to understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just about this one wedding incident. I'd been cast in the role of family scapegoat from childhood. Always blamed for problems. Always criticized. Always compared unfavorably to Celeste. My therapist helped me see that my family had needed someone to be the problem so they could avoid looking at their own dysfunction. I'd been chosen for that role not because of anything I'd done wrong, but because that's how toxic family systems work. The genuine apologies I received from some family members meant a lot to me. My cousin Bridget and I rebuilt our relationship slowly and carefully. We started meeting for coffee once a week, then expanded to doing other activities together. She introduced me to some of her friends who became my friends too. Having her back in my life in an authentic way showed me what real family relationships could look like when they weren't poisoned by favoritism and manipulation. She never made excuses for her past behavior but showed through her actions that Shed changed. My Uncle Graham stayed true to his word after sending that letter. He checked in on me regularly, invited me to family events on his side of the family that didn't include my parents or Celeste, and made it clear he was in my corner now. He admitted to other family members that He'd been wrong about me, and spoke up when anyone tried to continue the narrative that I'd done something wrong by exposing the truth. Having his support and advocacy within the family structure meant more than I could express. My Aunt Lenora became one of my strongest allies. She started hosting separate holiday gatherings and family events that included me but not my parents or Celeste. She made it clear to everyone that the division in the family was not my fault, that I'd been treated terribly, and that she wouldn't participate in any further scapegoating. Other family members followed her lead, and gradually a new family structure emerged where some people stayed loyal to my parents and Celeste, while others aligned themselves with the truth and with me. Preston sent me flowers and a heartfelt card thanking me for saving him from the biggest mistake of his life. In the card, he wrote about how devastated He'd been to discover the truth, but how grateful he was that I'd had the courage to show him before it was too late to get out of the marriage cleanly. He explained that the annulment had been granted quickly, that He'd recovered most of the money Celeste had stolen, and that his lawyers were pursuing criminal charges for the fraud and identity theft. Preston and I met for coffee a few weeks after the annulment was finalized. He looked like a different person than the confident, smiling groom I'd seen in the wedding photos. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, and carried himself with the exhaustion of someone who'd been through a trauma. He apologized extensively for the things He'd said to me, for calling me disturbed and toxic, for believing Celeste's lies. He said He'd been completely fooled by her performance, and that he felt like an idiot for not seeing the signs. We talked for hours about red flags He'd missed or rationalized away. Celeste's insistence on a quick wedding, her constant need for expensive things. The way Shed isolated him from his friends and family. Her phone was always face down and password protected. Shed regularly disappeared for hours with vague explanations. Preston had noticed all these things but had convinced himself they were normal or that he was being paranoid. Looking back with clear eyes, he could see the entire relationship had been a manipulation from start to finish. Preston told me He'd discovered even more evidence after leaving the wedding. When He'd gone through Celeste's belongings and financial records with his lawyer, they'd found Shed been planning this scheme for over a year before they even met. Shed researched him online, found out about his business and assets, and engineered their first meeting at a networking event. Everything about their relationship had been calculated and fake. Preston said, knowing that their entire history together had been a lie, was almost harder to process than the affair and the financial fraud. Celeste's life fell apart spectacularly. She lost her job when the scandal reached her workplace, and her employer decided they didn't want to be associated with someone embroiled in fraud allegations. Kyle dumped her immediately once his involvement became public because He'd only been interested in her while she had access to Preston's money. Without a wealthy husband to leech off of and without her affair partner, Celeste had nowhere to go except back to our parents' house. She moved back into her childhood bedroom, a 30-something woman whose carefully constructed life had collapsed entirely. The community ostracization hit Celeste hard. She couldn't go anywhere in town without people recognizing her and whispering. Her friends from college distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with her reputation. Her social media accounts, which had been full of carefully curated perfect life images, were deleted after the comments became too brutal to ignore. Mutual acquaintances told me Celeste barely left the house anymore, too ashamed to face the public judgment. Part of me felt satisfied by her downfall, but mostly I just felt sad that it had come to this. What struck me most about Celeste's response to everything was her complete lack of remorse or accountability. She never once apologized to Preston for what Shed done to him. She never acknowledged that her actions had been wrong. Even after being caught with undeniable evidence, she maintained that she was the victim, that I'd destroyed her life by exposing her, that everyone was overreacting to a few mistakes. Her inability to take responsibility or show genuine remorse confirmed what I'd learned in therapy about narcissistic personality traits and how some people simply cannot see themselves as anything other than the victim. My parents' attempt at an apology came about 6 weeks after everything exploded. They invited me to lunch at a restaurant, and I agreed to meet them only because my therapist encouraged me to hear what they had to say. The apology they offered was hollow and conditional. My mother said she was sorry things had gotten so out of hand and that feelings had been hurt on all sides. My father acknowledged they'd made some mistakes in how they'd handled the situation. But neither of them took real responsibility for their actions, or admitted they'd been fundamentally wrong about me. What bothered me most was how they still defended Celeste. My mother insisted that yes, Celeste had made mistakes, but she was still their daughter and they had to support her through this difficult time. My father said that families stick together no matter what, implying I should somehow forgive Celeste and move past everything. They wanted me to attend family events again, to pretend nothing had happened, to help restore the family's reputation in the community. They expected me to make everything okay again by playing along with their fiction that this was just a rough patch we could all get past. I set firm boundaries with my parents that day. I told them I would not attend any family events where Celeste was present. I explained I would not discuss Celeste with them or listen to them defend her actions. I made it clear I expected genuine accountability and changed behavior, not just surface-level apologies designed to smooth things over. I said if they couldn't respect those boundaries, then we couldn't have a relationship at all. They were shocked by my firmness, not used to me standing up to them so directly, but I was done being the family doormat. My parents initially tested my boundaries, inviting me to things where Celeste would be present or trying to guilt-trip me into family unity. Each time, I held firm. I said no and didn't justify or explain beyond my original boundary statement. Eventually, they seemed to understand I was serious. A few family members who'd remained loyal to my parents stopped speaking to me entirely, choosing their side of the family division. That hurt less than I'd expected. Losing relationships with people who'd never really valued me wasn't actually much of a loss at all. My professional life improved dramatically once I wasn't being drained by wedding obligations and family drama. Without the constant stress and demands on my time and energy, my work performance went back to its previous high standards. I started arriving at the office earlier, staying focused throughout the day, and producing quality work again. My boss noticed the change immediately and commented on how good it was to have the old Harper back. 3 months after the wedding disaster, I received the promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years. The promotion came with a significant raise, a corner office, and leadership responsibilities I'd been craving. More importantly, it validated that I was good at my job and that my career success wasn't just luck or circumstance. I'd earned this through hard work and dedication, and nobody could take that away from me or minimize it the way my family always had. My coworkers threw me a celebration party, and standing there surrounded by colleagues who respected and valued me, I realized this was what real support looked like. My social life expanded in ways I hadn't expected. My best friend Mackenzie, who'd stood by me through the entire wedding disaster and its aftermath, introduced me to her wider friend circle. I started attending social events and activities I'd never had time for before because I'd been too busy catering to Celeste's demands. I joined a book club, started taking a pottery class, and volunteered at a local animal shelter. These activities connected me with people who knew nothing about my family drama and liked me for who I was. One of my work friends, a guy named Drew from the design department, became a close confidant during this time. We'd been friendly colleagues before, but during my healing process, he emerged as someone I could really talk to. Had been through his own family trauma and understood the complex emotions I was dealing with. We started having regular coffee chats that turned into long conversations about life, family, healing, and moving forward. Having someone who understood without judgment was incredibly valuable. Through Drew's recommendation, I found a support group for people who'd been scapegoated in their families. Meeting others who'd experienced similar dynamics was revolutionary for my healing. These were people who understood exactly what it felt like to be the family target, to be blamed for everything, to watch a golden child sibling get away with terrible behavior while you were criticized for minor mistakes. Sharing stories and coping strategies with people who truly understood helped me process my experiences in ways individual therapy couldn't. The healing journey wasn't linear or easy. I had bad days where I grieved the family I'd wanted but never had. I had moments of anger where I wanted revenge on Celeste and my parents for how they treated me. I had periods of guilt where I wondered if I should have handled things differently or if I was being too harsh with my boundaries. My therapist helped me understand that all these feelings were normal and valid, that healing from family trauma takes time, and that there was no right way to do it. What I learned through therapy was profound and life-changing. I realized I'd been scapegoated my entire life, not because of anything wrong with me, but because dysfunctional family systems need someone to blame. My parents had enabled Celeste's narcissistic behavior and needed me to be the problem child to avoid confronting their own failures as parents. The favoritism I'd experienced wasn't about Celeste being better than me. It was about my parents' inability to love both children equally, and their need to create a hero and villain dynamic. I learned that standing up for truth, even when it's painful and costly, was the right choice. If I'd stayed silent about what I'd discovered, Preston would be trapped in a fraudulent marriage with someone planning to destroy him financially. Celeste would have gotten away with her scheme, and probably would have done it again to someone else. My family would have continued their toxic patterns indefinitely. By exposing the truth, I'd freed Preston, stopped Celeste's con, and freed myself from a family system that would never value me. I came to understand that protecting myself wasn't selfish, but necessary. I'd spent my whole life sacrificing my needs, my money, my time, my mental health to please family members who were never going to be pleased. I'd diminished myself to make Celeste look better, worked myself to exhaustion to meet unreasonable demands, and accepted terrible treatment because I thought that's what family meant. But real family doesn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Real family supports and values you. One of the hardest lessons was accepting that sometimes the trash really does take itself out. The family members who'd cut me off or stayed loyal to my parents and Celeste were showing me who they were. They were people who valued image over truth, who'd rather maintain a comfortable lie than face an uncomfortable reality, who'd participate in scapegoating rather than stand up for what's right. Losing relationships with those people wasn't a loss. It was a clearing out of toxicity that made room for healthier connections. I had to release the guilt and shame I'd carried for years. My family had trained me to believe I was the problem, that I was jealous and bitter and somehow less than Celeste. Even after everything that had happened, I sometimes caught myself falling into those old thought patterns. My therapist helped me recognize those thoughts as echoes of my family's abuse, not truth. The reality was that I'd been the strong one, the honest one, the one brave enough to speak up even when it cost me everything. 6 months after sending that video, I celebrated my 33rd birthday surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. Mackenzie threw me a party at her apartment with Drew, Bridget, my support group friends, and several work colleagues. My parents weren't there. Celeste wasn't there. Most of my extended family wasn't there. But the people who showed up were people who valued me, who'd stood by me, who'd proven themselves trustworthy. The party was small but filled with authentic love and celebration, and I felt happier than I had in years. I reflected on everything that had happened, and realized I didn't regret sending that video. If I had to do it all over again, I'd make the same choice. It protected Preston from a terrible fate. It exposed the truth that my family needed to see, even if they didn't want to see it. It stood up for myself in a way I'd never been able to before. Yes, it had cost me relationships and caused pain and drama, but it had also freed me from a toxic family system and allowed me to build a life based on truth and self-respect. The family had called me jealous for not attending the wedding. They'd painted me as bitter and vindictive, as someone so consumed by envy that I'd make up lies to destroy my sister's happiness. But I'd been the only one brave enough to tell the truth. I'd been the only one willing to protect someone who was being conned. I'd been the only one with enough integrity to expose wrongdoing even when it meant losing everything. Sometimes being the black sheep just means you're the only honest one in a family of liars. What shocked them wasn't just the video itself, though that certainly shook everyone who saw it. What really shocked them was that I didn't need their approval anymore. For my entire life, I'd been trying to earn my family's love and acceptance, changing myself and sacrificing endlessly in the hope they'd finally value me. But sending that video was my declaration of independence. I was done performing for people who'd never appreciate the show. I was done protecting people who'd never protected me. I was done being small so others could feel big. The real shock was that I'd freed myself. I'd walked away from the family system that had oppressed me and built a new life on my own terms. I surrounded myself with people who valued truth and loyalty, people who treated me with respect and kindness. I focused on my career and watched it flourish without the constant drain of family drama. I invested in my mental health and learned to love and respect myself in ways I never had before. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actually thriving. Looking back, I could see how every attack, every betrayal, every moment of being scapegoated had been building to that breaking point. The wedding was just the final straw, the ultimate expression of how little my family valued me and how much they worshipped Celeste's false image. If it hadn't been the wedding, something else would have eventually pushed me to break free. The video was just the tool I used to claim my freedom and my truth, and I'd never been more at peace with a decision in my entire life. Would you have sent that video if you were in my situation? Have you ever been the scapegoat in your family, or watched someone expose a truth nobody wanted to see? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I'd love to hear your stories and perspectives. If this story resonated with you, or if you think someone else needs to hear it, please hit that like button and share this video with them. And make sure you're subscribed to this channel because there are more stories coming about family drama, standing up for yourself, and choosing truth over comfort. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that your worth isn't determined by how your family treats you, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who refuse to see your value. Take care of yourselves out there, and remember that you deserve relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. Until next time.